Enjoy the journey. You have the power to choose. When you find yourself in a dark place, plug into your source and choose to live. Hey everyone, welcome to the Pack Light Podcast with Travel Light Network and the Rewind Network. I'm Dee Wick, your host, and this podcast focuses on all things mental health recovery with discussions about navigating through the challenges of mental health, all while unpacking emotional baggage. Your presence here is deeply appreciated. Now, let's dive into our discussion. Hey everybody, I'm Dee Wick, your host. Welcome to the Pack Light Podcast and welcome to episode 4 of our podcast series. Today we're diving into the essential topic of holistic self-care, exploring its profound impact on our overall well-being. I'm thrilled to be joined by 2 incredible guests who will share their insights and experiences, guiding us through practical steps we all can take to nurture our mind, body, soul, and spirit. As we embark on this enlightening conversation, I invite you to reflect on your own self-care practices and consider how you can integrate holistic approaches into your day-to-day life. Let's dive in and let's empower ourselves together. So today's topic, holistic self-care. Is it difficult for you to give yourself the love that you freely give everyone else? If so, take this journey with us. We're going to be talking today about 3 topics, just 3 snippets of a course from our sister company. And it's what is involving understanding self-awareness, emotional regulation, and mental health maintenance. So those are just the 3 snippets that we're going to pull out of those courses for the nonprofit programs, and we're going to expound on them and hopefully, again, we can enjoy this discussion together. So up first, these incredible guests, they were here before and they did such an amazing job and was so inspiring and so impactful that we had to have them back. So we have Soli, who came back to be with us on tonight. And then we have Crystal Taylor, also back with us tonight. Hopefully she brought some of that fire that she had on the last episode. So Soli has understanding self-awareness. So Soli, I want you to take a moment and introduce yourself briefly and then go into how understanding self-awareness applies to holistic self-care.
So I guess I will start with what self-awareness means to me. So to me, self-awareness is the art of knowing or being aware of who we are and who we're not. It's the art of knowing and being aware of what it is that we believe and don't believe, and what it is that we stand for and don't stand for. It's the art of being aware of how we feel. And most importantly, it's the art of being aware of what it is that we want and need from ourselves, others, and life. And also what it is that we don't want and need from ourselves, others, and life. And I feel like it's an essential part of self-care and well-being because, truthfully, how can we show up for and as ourselves if we're not aware of who we are? And how can we meet our wants and needs and allow others to meet our wants and needs if we're not even aware of what it is that we want and need? And most importantly, how can we honor our feelings and find holistic ways to cope with our challenging feelings if we're not even aware of what it is that we feel? And so I feel like to truly show up for ourselves and as ourselves and to achieve what it is that we want and need and to allow others to meet our wants and needs and to honor ourselves and to honor our feelings, it's important to be aware of those things. And I kind of wanted to dive into the things that kind of block us from that self-awareness. And I did want to kind of make this personal and talk about my personal experiences. Some of us, if not most of us, we weren't fortunate enough to grow up in environments full of people who didn't judge or demonize our authenticity or our desires or our wants or our needs. Some of us grew up in environments where we had to suppress who it is that we are, and we had to ignore our feelings and suppress what it is that we want because according to the people in our environment, our authenticity wasn't enough or it wasn't acceptable. According to those in our environment, our feelings weren't important. And some of us had to put our feelings on the back burner just to please, whatever authority figures or our friends or the peers or whatever was going on and whoever was going on in our environment. And then when it came down to our wants and needs, some of us, well, according to those in our environments, we were made to feel like our wants and needs didn't matter, or we were made to feel ashamed or even afraid of our wants and needs. And some of us even were led to believe that our wants and needs weren't even attainable. And so some of us grew up, again, suppressing who we are and being ashamed or afraid to feel what we feel or honor our feelings, or being ashamed and afraid to want what we want or need what we need. I will say, before getting into it, it wasn't all bad. God sends an angel. And I will say that I did have an angel in my corner. Shout out to my mom, who did hold space and who did hold space for the most authentic version of me, but it wasn't easy getting there. So me personally, I grew up with like a false and distorted sense of self. I grew up being afraid and ashamed of my feelings, good and bad. I grew up feeling like demonizing basically my wants and needs. And therefore, it bred a life for me of imbalances and lack and brokenness. I developed unhealthy coping mechanisms. And because of that, I wasn't living a wholesome life. Again, I wasn't showing up for myself. I wasn't showing up as myself. And it was also hard for me to really and genuinely and truly show up for others. So some things that helped me to overcome that is practicing radical self-acceptance. And I'll say that again, radical. Okay, you have to be radical about this thing, especially when you were programmed to work against yourself, and especially when you were programmed to suppress your wants and needs. It takes that radical self-acceptance to really overcome that. Now, what I will say is one thing that truly freed me was this book that I read on this self-discovery journey that I was on. This book is called There Is Nothing Wrong with You, Going Beyond Self-Hate. And this book is by Sherry Huber. I hope that I am pronouncing her name right, but if you are somebody who grew up with a distorted sense of self, and if you're somebody who struggles with perfectionism and you struggle with self-forgiveness and you're quick to blame yourself for your failures, and it's easier for you to blame yourself for your failures than it is for you to own when you win and own your victories. If you're somebody who struggles with control issues, if you're somebody who struggles with low self-esteem and even addictions, I highly recommend that you read that book called There Is Nothing Wrong with You, Going Beyond Self-Hate. When I started reading that book, it truly opened my eyes to the fact that, and granted, the people in our environments, maybe they did mean well, you know what I'm saying? But it doesn't take away from the fact that they passed down that the art of hating yourself. It's self-hate. Like, we were programmed to hate ourselves. We were programmed to demonize ourselves. We were programmed to suppress what it is that we want and need out of life. So that book really, really broke the barriers for me. Like, it taught me how to own all of me. It taught me how to own my strengths and own my weaknesses. It taught me that it's okay to not be okay. It taught me to, most importantly, to honor my feelings, like whatever it is, the anger, the hate, the shame, the fear, without basing my identity around it. So when it comes down to overcoming those barriers, and practicing radical self-acceptance, making sure that we have the right tools to do that is so important. So again, I highly recommend self-help books. Another thing that helps me to overcome that and to practice radical acceptance is journaling and self-talk. Like, I mean, there were times where there are still times that I spend talking to myself, like sometimes for hours alone, obviously, because, you know, you don't want, I mean, who cares about what people think? That's another part of radical acceptance or radical self-acceptance, not caring about what people think because you know who you are and God knows who you are. But self-talk is a powerful tool because it really allows you to take a look at what's going on up here and in here when it comes down to what you believe about yourself and what you believe about life. And then breaking down the barriers that need to be broken down and building barriers that need to be built. When it comes down to, you know, protecting your true identity, and when it comes down to protecting your wants and needs and honoring those things. Another thing that helped me to overcome was therapy. When I was able to meet and talk with somebody who was willing to listen without judgment. And also, I feel like that is also key to no judgments. Like, it doesn't matter how uncomfortable a thought may be, how uncomfortable a feeling may be, how uncomfortable it may be to talk about the actions that we took. Like, no judgments is so important. So talking to somebody who was willing to just listen with compassion and love, and then, you know, give advice from a genuine and loving and wholesome place really helped me. You know, because those tools truly it just allows us to be and think and feel again without judgments and but while also holding space for the truth of who we are. And I want to tie back down to the self-awareness. Like, I feel like for radical self-acceptance to work, it is really so important for us to really know who we are and to know who we're not and to know what we want and what we don't want, and to use that as a compass or a filter or a standard, so that while we're using these tools and while we're reflecting, we're only reinforcing those thoughts, feelings, and actions that are in alignment with who we are and what it is that we want out of life. And if we notice thoughts, feelings, and actions that aren't in alignment, we don't use that as an opportunity to judge or shame ourselves or demonize ourselves. Instead, we use that as an opportunity to solidify our truth and to solidify more of who we are and to be pushed closer to what it is that we want out of life. And we use the thoughts, feelings, or actions that are not in alignment that we may notice. We use that as an opportunity to lovingly guide ourselves or to be guided by God or our higher self or our angels or source, whatever you believe, or to be guided back to the truth of who we are and on the path that truly benefits us and contributes to our well-being. So in all, that's why I feel like self-awareness is so important. And that's how I feel like it contributes to self-care and well-being overall. Because when you know yourself, you love yourself, and it's easy to be yourself. And that's just a little motto that I like to say. It's know, love, and be thyself by any means necessary. So
thank you so much, Soli. That was packed with a lot of takeaways. I loved in the beginning when you said the art of self-awareness and attributed it to the art of. And we know that any artist takes its time with their craft and the creative flow and the short strokes and the long strokes and all of the things that comes with the creativity of being an artist and how you contributed that or attributed that to it being art. I love how you do that because it is an art. It is something that takes a lot of discipline and attendance and being present and establishing boundaries and all of those things. So wonderful takeaways. And then I love when you expounded on how many of us were raised to not honor our feelings. Many of us were raised to not trust our feelings, and we were raised to suppress them. So thank you for pulling that out. And I think that this segues right into what Crystal topic on Crystal's segment is going to be on emotional regulation. So Crystal, did any of that stand out to you with regards to the emotions that many of us were raised to suppress or to ignore or disregard? And how does that relate to your thoughts on emotional regulation?
I think both of you really hit it on the head. And I loved, Soli, when you talked about our childhood, because when we think about regulating our emotions, it's often the emotions that we often regulate are often tied to a lot of the emotions that we either dealt with or haven't dealt with as children. So let's take it back a little bit. I know for me personally, I can totally relate to you, Soli, when it comes to suppressing certain emotions and suppressing myself, ultimately who I authentically am, to kind of fit into certain molds that never really were created for me. So now that I'm an adult, there are times where I experience things that takes me back to that place of childhood of having to suppress myself or fit into molds that aren't for me or having to be someone that I'm not. And in those circumstances, that's when emotional regulation comes into play. For anyone who doesn't know what emotional regulation is, if you're watching this, I actually am still learning myself, but ultimately it's calming your nervous system, because your nervous system is often the place where you feel a lot of the jitters, anxiety, all of that really comes from your central nervous system. So we all have different ways of relaxing ourselves, calming our nervous systems, easing stress, all of that. And I think for me personally, I try to do what my inner child, I like to say, would want to feel at ease. And for some reason, I might be getting off track, but I feel the need to say this, that a lot of times we are grown adults in our bodies. Our bodies may be 25, 30, 40 years old, but emotionally, we may still be 3, 4, 5 years old. And I know that that's my own personal experience that I just actually came to recently. And that's why I think it's so amazing how this week's podcast is holistic self-care, because a lot of times most of us are dealing with emotions that go far back to our childhood. Some of the stuff that we're dealing with is generational. Some of the trauma that we carry in our bodies, our ancestors have experienced, and it got passed down through us, through our DNA, y'all. It goes that deep, okay? So I think that oftentimes while we're experiencing these emotions in our bodies, we're not only processing our own childhood, but we're processing grandmom's childhood and grandpa's childhood and great grandpa's childhood. And it's just all a conglomeration of trauma that's stored in our bodies. So I think it's important to be patient with yourself on this process, on this journey of healing your emotional body, as they like to call it in the psychology world, I believe. Healing your emotional body, taking time to get to know your emotional body, understanding your emotions, identifying your emotions. And I think oftentimes a lot of people who may be empaths, if you don't know what an empath is, type it on Google, go do your research, boo. But empaths are people who usually feel things a little bit more deeper than the average person. They can feel other people's emotions on top of their own. So that's a whole nother world. So if you are somebody who considers yourself to be an empath, I think it's really important that you just are really patient with yourself. Understand that the work that you're doing is something that a lot of people can't handle. And I think that you're doing a great job with that if you're watching this. So I just wanted to say that, just be patient with yourself while you're regulating yourself, regulating your emotions, and have fun with the process, guys. Like, we're all doing the best that we can. And it's not easy living in this world today. It's a crazy world we're living in, but with the right tools that Soli mentioned, and, just following your heart and staying true to who you are, you'll get further than you think.
I love hearing how it's okay to have emotions. That's what I'm hearing. That's what I'm hearing with you. That's what I heard with Soli, even in self-awareness, that emotions are natural. It's a part of being a human being. To be able to fully embrace our emotions and our self-awareness without judgment and without being self-critical is so crucial in our well-being. So we're going to go ahead and I just want to switch gears here just a little bit and just kind of just add a little bit to what both of you incredible ladies were saying in regards to emotion. And just to ask you, and we can end on this question before we go into our next segment, is how important is emotional intelligence? Emotional intelligence is how we understand emotions and how they may influence our thoughts and our behaviors. Just having that self-awareness of our emotions and how they can influence us in our thoughts and our behaviors.
When it comes down to processing our emotions and also processing other people's emotions, I feel like emotional intelligence doesn't only allow us to understand what it is, how we feel, and choose like the right methods for dealing with our own emotions, but it also allows us to understand others and who they are, and allows us to find the right methods to handling others, depending on whatever emotional state they're in. And I feel like emotional intelligence and self-awareness and regulating your emotions are all like, it's so important, and it's almost like a step process. Like there is no one without the other. Like you're constantly doing all at once when it comes down to that, because you have the self-awareness aspect of emotional intelligence where you're aware of what it is that you're feeling and what it is that you're thinking. And then depending on how you regulate your emotions, you're able to come up with creative ways or choose the best ways to cope or to handle it, even with others too. Being aware of others and what it is that they're feeling, and then finding the creative ways to handle whoever it is that we're interacting with. So it's definitely important, and they're all interconnected. And I don't think we'll ever just do one without the other.
With emotional intelligence, especially going back to the whole empath, if you feel other people's emotions and all of that, I think it's really important to know how to set boundaries and healthy boundaries for yourself so that you're not overstimulated or overwhelmed with emotion, because there is such thing as being a little bit too, I don't want to say there's such thing as too emotional, but like emotions without boundaries can be chaotic. And I think that that's where a lot of people start to get overwhelmed and overstimulated and start to have depression even, or anxiety, because they're taking in so much and they don't understand that majority of the stuff that they're feeling is not even their own stuff. It's coming from the outside world. So that's where boundaries comes in, and prioritizing your self-care and making sure that you're maintaining your self-care, and just doing what you have to do to make sure that you're operating at your best first, so that anything that anyone else gets is from the overflow.
Based off of what you said, it's so true. I remember reading an article about being over responsible. So when you talk about boundaries, that ties right into being over responsible. And that's why, that self-awareness piece is important, so that when you're dealing with others, you know whose stuff is who. Because when you are over responsible and then you get overwhelmed, you start taking on taking on other people's problems and taking on other people's identities. And that also can lead to an identity crisis. Because by the end of it, you're like, wait a second, is that how I feel? Is that how I am? Or maybe and you know what I'm saying? So I just wanted to say, like, yes, snap to that, like the boundaries, and that keeps us from being over responsible, so that we can holistically regulate our emotions. And then if somebody is open to being helped with their emotions, we're able to effectively do that without having an identity crisis.
I came up with an acronym. I'm real big on acronyms, and the acronym is DAB, D-A-B, as in DAB. So the D stands for discipline, the A stands for attendance, and the B stands for boundaries. So we're going to come back with part 2 and dive more into that acronym, and then also intersect and interlock some more with emotional regulation and understanding self-awareness. Thank you for being with us on this evening. Thank you for listening. We hope you enjoyed Holistic Self-Care Part 1 and were inspired by our phenomenal guests and their insights. In our next episode, we want you to come back with Holistic Self-Care Part 2, which I believe will offer you valuable tools for nurturing your mind, your body, your soul, and your spirit. Before you go, I'd like to ask you to do one thing. Please share your thoughts with us by emailing us at packlight818@gmail.com. And the email will also be found in the credits and the descriptions below. Send us a topic you'd like for us to cover and address. Until we meet again, Remember to lighten your load and stay connected to the God within.